Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, your go-to resource for unlocking the stories of your ancestors. Dive into the newspapers where your family's history unfolds as you search nearly a billion pages in seconds. Newspapers.com offers an unparalleled treasure trove of historical newspapers, providing a window into the past. With papers from the 17th century to today, newspapers.com is the largest online newspaper archive. Use promo code Genealogy Adventures for a 20% discount on your subscription. That's Genealogy Adventures at newspapers.com. Sign up today at newspapers.com and embark on a journey of discovery. Hello, everyone. This is Danya with Genealogy Adventures. I hope you guys are doing well today. Brian is not with us today because he actually was at Roots Tech. So we are just us today. We're going to have this good old time today, and we're going to be joined with Myrna E. Heath. And Myrna is the author. I'm going to jump right into this. I'm going to say hello to everybody, of course. And we're going to jump right into this whole thing. Now, we are having some technical difficulties, and I do want to apologize for that because Myrna's having some difficulties, but you will see a picture of her shortly. So if you guys just give me a second, and I just want to apologize. But for right now, let me introduce Myrna. Myrna is a descendant of California pioneers, was born and grew up in San Francisco, California as a student member of the Congressional of Racial Equality during the Civil Rights Movement. She protested against the city's segregated housing policies. Later, as a longtime resident of Boston, where much of the research required to write this volume was conducted, she fought for equal justice as a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. She now resides in the Mid-Atlantic region after traveling throughout North America, the Caribbean, Europe, and the South Pacific. She is active in several historical organizations and a Golden Life member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. All right now, a women's rights movement stalwart. Myrna is a former teacher, business person, and for many years, an author and publisher. She has devoted decades to researching, presenting, and exhibiting at regional, national, and virtual historical events. She earned her BA degree from San Jose State University and her MED from Providence College. The struggle for equal justice is her tribute to those who fight for equal justice for all people. The author's other publications are Our Shared Heritage and Sin Burn Newsletter. Welcome, 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 Miss Myrna E. Heath.
Well, hello, Danya.
How are
And
you?
I'm well. And hello to
That's
your
great.
audience. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I'm really, really happy to have you here. I'm getting ready to pull a picture up of you so others can see who you are. There we are. So we're going to set this up. And we're going to make sure that everybody knows who you are. So this so we could see who we're talking to. So how are you today?
Happy to speak
What
with your audience.
can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, ma'am. How are you today?
Good.
That's great. I'm glad. I'm glad. So I want to just first go in and because this is a genealogy show, I want to let everybody know that Miss Myrna is also, or Miss Heath is also a genealogist. So let's talk about how you got into doing all of this because I know it actually started with you in genealogy. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's correct. Well, at a very early age, I was interested in my family history and very inquisitive. So I started speaking to my grandmothers and their sisters about our genealogy, both on both sides, my paternal and maternal side. Of course, I didn't know the term genealogy. I was just interested in family history. Later on, I became affiliated with the Association of, excuse me, the Afro American Genealogical and Historical Society. And that's where I began to become a very serious researcher. And of course, I did my family tree, and then just um, went on from there.
And did you find some of this stuff that you wrote about in your book? Did you find any connection from your family that made you get to the book? Like, how did that happen?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Well, when I was about in my late teens, my grandmother told me about David Walker, Crispus Attucks, and William Lloyd Garrison. Her family, I need to back up, her family was originally from Boston, and they were abolitionists. And her father was the son of an abolitionist. So she gave me the history of the abolitionist movement in Boston. And so I've spent
Mm,
many years researching that particular topic.
wow. Okay, so now we have the background. We know how you got to that point. So now you're now digging into abolitionists and things of that nature. Did you find any of your family members that were digging into that you found that were abolitionists as far as research
Oh,
was concerned?
yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, my great great grandmother, since we're talking about women, my great
Yes.
great grandmother, Eliza Butler, was an abolitionist. And she was one of the founders of the United Daughters of Zion, which was a prominent women's group in the 19th century. It was founded in Boston in 1845. And they had chapters throughout the eastern seaboard.
That's
And
amazing.
they were really the stalwarts of the black abolitionists, the black women's rights movement.
That's amazing. So how does it feel to know that you have a an ancestor that was really pushing the that whole abolitionist movement?
Well, it's very interesting, and I'm in awe at their how fearless they were at the time. You can imagine how courageous they had to be to pursue
Yes,
something like that at that time.
yes. You know, I was an Uber driver once, and as an Uber driver, you always meet different people. But I was driving for Uber one time, and during the whole March on Washington when Trump had become president, and during the Women's March, and this one, these two ladies got in my car. And when they got in my car, I was so in awe with them because they were telling me their stories. Because, you know, Uber drivers are like bartenders. They get all of the news, they get all the message, they get all of the information. And everybody sends to tell their story. And these two ladies was telling me their story, and they had actually just met each other because they ran from New York City to Washington, D.C. And they just told their story about how they met and why they came. And they came because they wanted to support women, and they wanted to, you know, talk about how our rights were going to be taken away and things. And I mean, they don't even realize that they were actually making history right then and there. So women have always just been this whole, have always been in this whole fight when it comes to our history and where we start out and who we are and what we're going to start out to be. So I want to jump into your book now. Um, I want to talk about the first person in your book, actually, Miss Maria Stewart. How did you find out about Miss Maria Stewart?
Well, Mariah Stewart
Mariah.
is a well. I let me back up. I lived in
Okay.
Boston for almost 30 years, and Mariah Stewart is a very well known and respected person in Boston history, and so she was always represented in Black History programs that were sponsored by different various groups in the region. So that's how I became acquainted with her.
Okay. And what did when you did your research, because is Eliza, your great great grandmother Eliza, the one that married David?
Yes.
Okay, so they knew her.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
tell me, like when you did, because I know for me, when I do my research, I get to know my family.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
that's one of the biggest things for me. My grandparents, I never got the opportunity to meet them.
Oh.
So in doing the research for them,
Hmm.
on them,
Hmm.
I'm learning them. I'm learning so much information about them. I'm learning who they are, their character, their attitudes, things like that. What did you learn about David and Eliza that then started to teach you more about the other people that they met, like Mariah?
Well, I learned that they were very closely associated with Mariah and her husband. And I
Okay.
learned that Mariah was the first woman, black or white, to speak in public to a mixed audience of males and females. That was very unusual at the time for a woman to be so outspoken.
Yeah.
And I learned that Mariah had great respect for David Walker and for his fearlessness as an abolitionist.
Yeah, your book says that in September 1832 is when she gave her first speech. I'm quite
Yes.
sure that that was very weird. That was not normal during that time.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
It was
That had to be awesome.
extraordinary.
Yeah, that had to have been awesome. That had to have been awesome. So what more did your great great grandmother do when it came to, abolitionist work with your great great grandfather?
Well, my great great grandfather was not David Walker.
Okay.
David Walker was Eliza Butler's first husband. Her second
Okay.
husband was Alexander Dewson.
Okay.
And I am a descendant of Eliza Butler and Alexander Dewson.
Okay. Okay. So so tell me what led you to do the book of David, because the way the book is written, it's the story of David Walker
Oh,
and America leaders.
oh, because David Walker wrote Walker's Appeal. And in Walker's Appeal, he commanded the African diaspora to rise up and object to their subjugation. And he was the first black person to do that. And
Oh,
in
okay.
his appeal, which circulated throughout the diaspora, not only just in the United States but everywhere,
Wow.
he was putting his life on the line because eventually what happened was when he refused to stop publication and circulating, there was a bounty placed on his head, $1,000 if he was captured, um, dead and $10,000 if he was captured alive.
So why did they want him captured alive? Was there a reason for that?
Oh, yes, of course, because he was making trouble for the slaveholders. He was telling the slaves to rise up and, and refuse to be slaves. And so they were frightened.
So, I
And they,
mean, but do you think that if they caught him alive, that they would use him at having him alive would have been better because then they would use him as an example or like in for me, I mean, I think I would want him gone. I'd pay more money for him gone than alive.
well, you're right. They wanted to use him. They probably would have tortured him and imprisoned him for life, and who knows what they would have done to him.
Wow.
Lynched him. They could have done anything to him.
Okay. So the people that you wrote about in the book, it was different people. You wrote about both men and women throughout the timing. Did he or your great great grandmother, did they know most of these folks?
Well, they knew the people who, well, the book begins in 1820 and it ends with the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So they knew the people who were alive when they were living, but of course they didn't know the people.
Well, I
The
meant
future
I'm sorry.
generation.
I'm sorry. I meant the earlier ones.
Yes, the earlier years. Yes, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, like people like James Fortin, you wrote about him
Mm-hmm.
and how he was 14 years old and he was a powder boy for Captain Stephen Decatur.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did they like how did they move into knowing these people? I've read parts of your book. I must admit to you, I was preparing for my mom's birthday as well. So I didn't get a
Yeah.
chance to finish your book, but I did
Um,
so yes. But how did they get to know?
well,
How did they
James Fortin was a little bit older than Eliza and David Walker, and yeah, he was a generation ahead of them.
okay. Okay. I thought I was because I was like, well, this seemed earlier than
Yes.
them. So
Hmm.
you moved back and forth within the book.
No, no, it's sequential.
Okay, well, you gotta help me understand how you did that then.
Okay, it's in a different chapter. The first
Uh-huh.
chapter is about David and his family, and also it includes Prince Hall, the founder of the Prince Hall Masons.
Yes.
And then it talks about the forces against injustice. And that's when James Fortin was predominant.
Okay. So basically, what you were doing was talking about everything about David and Eliza and what
Hmm.
they did, and then you went back and you moved forward from there.
Yes, exactly. Hmm.
Okay. All right. So let's go into some more women within your book because this is Women's History Month, and
Hmm.
one of the next women that you began one of the next women that you started to talk about was a pair of sisters, and
Yes,
that was Angelina and Sarah Gremke.
yes.
They were
They were wealthy Southern women who came up
mhm,
from the South and settled in Philadelphia, and they were um, abolitionists and women's rights advocates. And they
yeah.
also spoke publicly and were chastised for doing so.
Now, what was amazing about them is that they left a South Carolina plantation to relocate in Philadelphia, and they joined the Quakers.
Right.
Can you go into more detail about why they did that?
Well, they felt that Slavery was wrong, for one thing, and they felt that women were being um, held in low esteem, and they wanted rights for women.
Okay. You want to talk more into them? Because I thought they were like just really kind of some really great women. They pulled in other women like Nancy Weston, and I mean they were awesome. You want to talk more
Oh
about them?
yes, well, the unusual thing about them is that they found that their brother had fathered a child, two children, as a matter of fact, with a slave woman. And when they found out about it, they provided for their nephews. They sent them
Yes,
to Lincoln University in
yes,
Pennsylvania, educated them, and one of them became a minister. He was the minister of the 16th Street Presbyterian Church in D.C., and the other one became a lawyer. And their families thrived in Philadelphia, and they did a lot of good work in Philadelphia.
yes, they did. And I
Mhm.
found I thought that was amazing that they just stepped up and they were like, okay, so you're not gonna do what you're supposed to do. We're gonna make sure that they're gonna be taken care of. And that's just like that's like what we do anyway. That's what women do. We always step up. We always kick in, jump in, and make sure that we're going to take care of what needs to be taken care of. I love that about us.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, especially
Mhm.
black women. But I
Yeah.
digress.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's my thing. Black women tend to step up in areas where most will not, and we're gonna get on that one with we're gonna get on that one because I cannot not get on that one. The next woman that you started to talk about was Miss Lucretia Mott.
Yes. Yes, Lucretia Mott um, hailed from Philadelphia. Actually, she was born in Massachusetts, but she resided in Philadelphia. And she was a leader in the abolitionist movement. She and her husband. And they also worked with William Lloyd Garrison in the American Anti-Slavery Society. And she was one of the founders of Swarthmore College, she and her husband.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, Henry Goins says, love me some black women. I know, right? I wish more men would be that way. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, yeah, she founded Swarthmore College in Philadelphia. Is that school is still in existence, right?
Oh, definitely. Yes. It's a very
And what
elite.
do they do? Because do they? I think when I looked it up, they actually do something to honor her yearly, don't they?
Well, I would imagine so. I can't speak to that, but I
Oh, okay.
can't understand any reason why they wouldn't.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, they actually have a whole like parade type thing for her every year. It's actually it's grand. It's a grand thing that they do for her. And
Hmm.
I thought you might have known about it, and I was going to let you discuss it. So, but yeah, she's actually very well known in the Philadelphia area with what she
Hmm.
did, and she also um did a lot. She was also one of the founders of the Female Anti-Slavery Society. You want to talk more about that?
Right. Yeah. Well, she and some other women, the Grimkes, were very active in that society. And
Hmm.
that's one of the things that they're known for, remembered.
So, can you tell me more about that society and what it did?
The Female Anti-Slavery Society. Well,
Yes, ma'am.
they they extended up and down the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard. They were very active also in the Boston area. And they did exactly what the name says. They worked to end slavery.
And they were also active in the Underground Railroad.
Oh, yes, definitely. Yes.
So, what would happen with women like this if they got caught, participating in these types of events or activities?
Well, I think it was pretty well known what they were doing. So, I mean, they were open about it, very vocal. And since they were white, nothing much was done. Um,
Really?
they were criticized, heavily criticized. In fact, the Grimke sisters, when they were so outspoken, they there was a riot almost. Um, on one instance in Philadelphia when the Grimke sisters were speaking.
What happened?
Well, they just the men objected to them speaking. I mean, they weren't harmed, but there was a lot of verbiage, unkind verbiage, objecting to them speaking in public.
Really? Was there a name to this riot? Sometimes they have names to riots back
No,
then.
no, I don't think there was a name for it, but just put it that way, the men didn't receive it very well. They thought it was improper for women to speak in public.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then you started to cover Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and of course the very infamous Susan B. Anthony.
Yes. Well,
So let's.
they were a pair to deal
Mm-hmm.
with, and they were very interesting people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton was she was the writer, and she wrote issues. Her writings addressed the issues surrounding women's rights. And Susan B. Anthony was very vocal. She was the speaker. And they also had published for a time a newspaper addressing the issues of women's independence. And of course, we all know about the meeting that was held. The name of the newspaper was The Revolution, by the way. And we know about the meeting in Seneca Falls where she and Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton addressed the issues regarding women's rights to vote. And they were at odds with Frederick Douglass, who believed that black men should get the vote before women. And because of his views, Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass had a major disagreement, and Susan B. Anthony and her group left the meeting and formed their own society, and they formed an opposition to Frederick Douglass. However, later on, the two had a, a limited reconciliation. But in the end, the black men did get the vote before women.
Yeah, they did, and then it was taken away again. But
Yes, yes, they were able to vote. The black men were able to vote during the Reconstruction, and of course, when Jim Crow it, became prevalent, it became very difficult for black men in the South to vote. However, black men in the North were able to vote, as my great grandfather voted not only in Boston, Massachusetts, but also in California.
So let me ask you a question about that. Why do you think? Because the whole thing about Boston really confuses me. Boston had a lot of abolitionists,
Yes.
and now the feeling of Boston has changed a lot. Why do you think that is?
Oh, well, it's fear. You know, people are very afraid of the change. Well, today they're very afraid of the changing demographics, the uncertainty of it. And if for all these years whites were in the majority, and now they're becoming the minority.
But did they not know that kind of like, I mean, so I don't have Brian to close my mouth. So, and our regulars, they know how I am. Weren't they in so many ways the kind of like the minority then too? I mean, it was millions of formerly enslaved people during that time. Did
Oh,
they just not recognize or know it then?
well, that's very true. In some areas of the South, the blacks were the majority, and that's why they didn't want them to vote. Because if they voted, they would vote on issues that were advantageous to blacks and maybe disadvantageous to whites.
Okay. Well, then you have Sojourner Truth also in the book.
Uh huh. She's a very interesting person.
Yes, she
Now,
is.
the interesting thing about Sojourner Truth, when people recite her Ain't I a Woman, they recite it in a Southern accent. But Sojourner Truth's first language was Dutch, and she spoke with a Dutch accent.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that.
I did not. Now I didn't. I thought
Mhm.
she was Southern.
Yeah. Sojourner Truth was a woman who won a case against her enslaver, former enslaver, where she was able to rescue her children. And then she went about giving speeches. And she also wrote a book that was a bestseller. And from that book, she was able to finance her abolitionist work. She was also um, an associate or an acquaintance of William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist in Boston. And Sojourner Truth's sons also served in the Civil War.
Mm.
And she was received by Abraham Lincoln at the White House in 1864, I believe it was.
Would she have been considered the first black woman to have that done?
Well,
Or was there one before her?
I don't imagine that there were. I can't say for sure, but
That's something because I do know that she was received by Lincoln, but not many. I've asked that question to people before to say was she the first black person, black female, um, for that, and no one seems to be able to answer that. But I think she probably was.
yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, and no one makes a big deal out of it. Like they make the big deal out of Frederick Douglass being the first African American to be, you know, brought into Lincoln, brought to a president like that. He was accepted. Why not do that for a woman? This is what we mean by equal rights.
Right.
Make that same big deal.
Mm-hmm.
That it should be the exact same thing. If you're gonna push and be excited about one person receiving and getting something, that then that same energy should be captured for the next person that's new or first at doing something. Am I correct? Am I wrong for saying that?
Right, right, right.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. So, what more about Miss Truth did you want to share? Is there more information about her you want to share?
Well, I think the thing that, well, if you look at the back of the book, you will see a memorial to Sojourner Truth that was created by the congressional women. There's a bust of her, of
Hmm.
Sojourner Truth, that is in the U.S. Capitol Visitor
Yeah,
Center. So if you
yeah.
ever go down there, you should see it. It was just originally displayed when Michelle Obama was first lady, and Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Sheila Jackson, they initiated and placed the bust in the U.S. Capitol. And also, there is in New York City in Central Park, there's a monument to Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton as pioneers of the women's rights movement.
That's awesome.
Hmm.
That's awesome. And we're gonna go into that one too. Um, but now let's talk about everyone's favorite person, Miss Harriet Tubman, because you do have her in the book, and you
Oh,
cannot not
yes.
in the book.
Hmm.
You just
Well,
you cannot when you're talking about equal justice and fighting for rights, you cannot not have her
oh
in the
no,
book.
Harriet Tubman was an amazing woman. We all
Yes,
know
she.
we all know the story about her rescuing slaves and bringing them north,
Yeah.
and she was also an affiliate of an associate of Frederick Douglass, and it is said that Frederick Douglass sheltered 11 slaves that she brought from the South in his home. And they were there for quite some time. And he had a significant difficulty providing for them. And Harriet Tubman, there is her home in New York, upstate New York, is open to people today as a monument to her work. It's part of the AME Zion Church. Is the group that is responsible for it today.
Yeah, I was reading that he said on one occasion I had 11 fugitives at the same time under my roof, and it
Hmm.
was necessary for them to remain with me until I could collect sufficient money to get them on to Canada. It
Hmm.
was the largest number I ever had at any one time, and I had some difficulty in providing so many with food and shelter.
Right. Hmm.
So did he go into detail as to how he was able to do that? Did he get assistance? Did he get help? Like how did he do it?
Oh, I guess he got help from other abolitionists that
Okay.
were able to help him, provide the necessities for the group.
Okay. Wow. Wow. I knew that he worked with her, but I didn't know that he actually provided shelter and food for people who were on the who was actually a part of the Underground Railroad. I didn't know he had done that.
Hmm.
That was new to me. So then the next person that you have under this book, in this book, next female. is Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Yes, Harriet Beecher Stowe, we all know about her. The
Well,
author of
shall we?
Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was a
Yeah.
best selling book, and it
Mm-hmm.
was the expose of the horrors of slavery. And
Yes.
this book is credited for instigating the Civil War, one of the things that instigated the Civil War. People read about slavery and the atrocities, and
So I know that.
mhm.
I know that it is one of the things. But can you explain to our audience why it's credit? It's one of the things that's credited.
Oh, because it was so widely circulated. It was a bestseller. It sold all over the world, and
Because
people.
I actually, because my great grand uncle is Preston Brooks, the man that beat Charles Sumner.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh my goodness!
I know, I know. He is the man you love to hate.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. He is that. He is the man you love to hate. Definitely.
Mm.
But and you actually have him in the book too.
Yes.
You have Charles Sumner in the book, not Preston.
Yes. Yes.
But I was very intrigued that you had both him and Harriet in here, knowing what I know about Preston, because Preston is actually another person who was supposed to been a who was considered a catalyst as well because of what he did um
Mm-hmm.
to Charles Sumner. So
Yes.
I found it very intriguing that you had both he and Harriet in the book. And that's why I was saying, can you explain to people why this her book was thought of as part of the catalyst to start the Civil War?
Well, because it exposed the evils of slavery. You have to understand that in those days, there was no television, no radio. So people got their information through print, through books and
Mm,
newspapers. And her book was a bestseller. So
mm,
everyone read it. It exposed the evils of slavery.
yes. And that is so great that you said that, because a lot of people don't seem to understand print was what we look at now as social media. It was like
Right.
just it's the same exact thing. It spread from one thing another to from one end of the earth of the US to the other end of the US, and the stories sometimes would take a while to get to the other side. So you would might see a story in 1884 in October, or in 1884 in March, but you might not see that same story in the on the other side of the US until October of 1884, because it
Yeah.
took that long to travel,
Right.
or something to that nature. And sometimes they would repeat stories over and over again. We actually have that same issue now with a family member in our family. We have a fourth, fifth, and sixth great grandfather named Moses Williams who had 45 children. And it was a whole story about him in the paper. That story had repeated itself so many times that it got repeated in the 1920s. It's the same exact story, verbatim. But you have people thinking that that's a totally different person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing to me how they're just not paying attention to the fact that this story is the exact same wording as the story that was written when it was first written.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that this is just like social media, newspapers, books, things of that nature. That was their story. That was the way that they did their storytelling. And imagination was big back then. So they could see what she wrote, allowed them to visualize what it
Mm-hmm.
was that was
Exactly.
actually going on during slavery time. It was amazing.
Exactly. You're
Yeah,
exactly
it
correct.
was
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to move on to Miss Louisa May Alcott.
Yes, Louisa May Alcott. She
Okay.
was the author of the popular novel Little Women.
Yeah.
It was published in 1868. Now, Louisa May Alcott lived just 19 miles from Boston in Massachusetts, and she was from a very wealthy, well educated, intellectual family, and she opposed slavery. In fact, it's said that her house was stopped on the Underground Railroad.
Oh.
And she also served as a nurse during the Civil War at the hospital in Washington, D.C.
Hmm. Okay. Now this picture that you have of her, I'm gonna be
Mhm.
honest with you. She got some melanin in her skin.
Oh,
I,
really?
I
I
mean,
hadn't noticed that.
she does. Her nose is not pointy. Um, she doesn't look European, Caucasian.
Hmm. I never
Not to me.
thought about that. Hmm.
I mean, I've looked at her picture before, and she just never looked Caucasian to me. And I've often wondered if there was more to her story than people actually knew. So when you did your write up on her, did you ever look into the genealogy of any of these women, most of these women, when you did your write up?
Well, I can tell you that she was from a very well educated and intellectual family. That I do
Okay.
know, but I don't know anything about her ethnicity.
Okay. All right. So you also wrote about Miss Dorothy Dix.
Yes, Dorothy Dix. She was from Hamden, Maine, and
Hmm.
she lobbied for legislation in the U.S. Congress to create the first American mental institution.
Oh
And
wow.
she also served as a nurse in the Civil War. I thought that was very interesting.
It was your story about her is very short, but that was a
Hmm.
very interesting piece about her. And I want to go into probably my most favorite person in the world, and probably everybody's favorite person without them recognizing or realizing it, um, is Miss Ida B. Wells.
Yes, Ida B. She is my favorite too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
she's definitely my favorite person. I I think that's probably why I was so honored when we won the Ida B. Wells Service Award from the Sons and Daughters. We were very, very honored to do that, because when we got that, I swear to you, I almost cried, because I know she was
Hmm.
very
Oh,
outspoken
she
woman.
was. She was a
Yeah, and
brave
we don't
woman.
hold our tongue here.
Yes. No, we do not.
Yeah,
And she
yeah,
came from very humble beginnings,
yes,
but,
she did.
but she was an exceptionally bright woman.
Yes, yes,
Um,
she was.
70
Yes,
years before Rosa Parks refused to move from the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama, 22-year-old Ida B. Wells refused to move from her seat in Tennessee in a train in Tennessee.
see, I
Uh,
didn't know that.
yes, and Ida B. Wells, well, she's pictured on the front of my book. Can you hold my book up so the
Oh,
audience
I was going
can
to,
see it?
baby.
Yeah, yeah, she is up a little bit. Yeah, she's pictured on the book. That's David Walker, where your finger is, and then Ida B. Wells, and down on the bottom is John Quincy Adams, who defended the Mende people and was able to return them back to Africa. That's why I wrote about him in the book. That was a very courageous thing that he did.
Yes,
But
it
anyway,
was.
getting back to Ida B. Wells, um, she was had a crusade against lynching, and lynching was so prevalent at that time.
Hmm.
She stood up to it, and exposed it in her newspaper. She was a teacher in Memphis, and she and another gentleman had a newspaper where they exposed all the trials and tribulations that the black people were going through at that time with Jim Crow. This
Yep.
was following the Civil War.
Yep.
The lynching and um,
Yes.
the daily torture and mistreatment that they
Yes.
were exposed to. A friend of
Yes.
hers, Thomas Mott, I believe his name was, had a grocery store, and he was thriving and doing very well. And this was something that the white people in the area could not tolerate, to see a black man being successful. And there was a ruckus, and he was defending himself in the community, and he eventually wound up being lynched. And Mary Church Terrell was a very good friend of Ida B. Wells, and she and Ida B. Wells went on to form organizations and activities that opposed Jim Crow. Also, Ida B. Wells was affiliated or was associated with Frederick Douglass, who was much older than she
Mm.
was.
Yes.
And here's a letter that Frederick Douglass wrote to Ida B. Wells, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Thank you for your faithful paper on the lynch abomination, now generally practiced against the people of color in the South. There has been no word equal to it in convincing power. I have spoken, but my words feeble in comparison. Brave woman, Frederick Douglass, 25th October 1892. She was a courageous woman. She
She
went
was.
all over the world to Europe, um, speaking about the persecution that the black people were suffering in the United States. Um, and in February 13th, 1913, was
Hmm.
when Delta Sigma sorority was founded. And just after that, the day after or the day before, um, President Wilson was inaugurated, the suffragettes paraded down the street in Washington, D.C. for the vote. And Ida B. Wells, although they designated that the black suffragettes would have to march at the end of the parade, Ida B. Wells slipped in the middle with the white contingency and marched in the parade.
That's right. She integrated it. She sure did.
Did,
And
yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I'm just so I love her. I just love
Yes.
her. And
Hmm.
she did so much. And the way she moved with things, there was no fear. She moved with no fear.
Right.
For everything she did, she moved with no fear. She moved with power. She moved
Hmm.
with dignity. She moved with strength. And it is with that even though we still were not able to vote so much time later, it is the reason why women then were able to vote, because of the kind of strength that she pushed forward.
Hmm.
Now the one thing that I don't agree with, though, and I don't think she would agree with, as much as I want Harriet Tubman, and we're going to have to be quick with this because I can't believe this hour is almost over, that in honor of Women's History Month, at one point they were trying to put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill in honor of Women's History Month when she had nothing to do with Women's History Month. She would not have been able to vote during that timing because she was they wanted to keep her to the back. They were like, okay, well, we'll work on you later. I just don't I don't think Sister Wells would have approved of that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I hadn't really given that much thought.
Yeah, a lot of people don't.
Mhm.
That's me.
Mhm.
And I just want people to remember we were not allowed, black women were not allowed to vote until the 60s. It wasn't even a thought for us to vote. Even when our black men were able to vote during the reconstruction era, we still were not allowed to vote. So to do something like that, to try to push us to the forefront as if that was a moment in time that we were going to have a piece of something, I find it to be misleading. Am I wrong to think that way? Correct me.
Well, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and that's your opinion.
Yeah, I guess. I guess. Well, I just want to thank you for just enlightening us on, because this time has gone so fast, and I just want to thank you for enlightening us of the many women in history that you've written about. But I want everybody to please make sure you can definitely find Myrna's book on Barnes and Noble,
No,
and it is called
no, it's not
no
Barnes.
Kobo.
No, you can find my book at Senbern, and I'm going to spell it SENBERN /publications.com. Again,
Okay.
Senbern, SENBERN /publications.com.
Okay, I just put that in the thing in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, like she said, you can find her book there. It is called The Struggle for Equal Justice, the story of David Walker and the
America's
America's
leaders.
leaders in the pursuit for justice for all. Thank you so very much for joining us today, Miss Myrna.
My pleasure.
It was awesome having you on. If you could just hold on for a moment, guys, we're going to have several different people on the shows for you guys this week, as well this month, as we talk about Women's History Month. We hope that you definitely enjoyed this show, and we look forward to talking with you more next week. Bye for now.
Bye.